Okay, let's unpack this. You know how sometimes you see a beauty trend pop up, maybe on social media,
Uh-huh.
and you kind of wonder, is that really a thing? Is it just, going to disappear?
Right, a flash in the pan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes a thing turns out to be, well, a rapidly expanding multi-million-dollar market,
Yeah,
one that's maybe set to become a billion-dollar force pretty soon.
precisely. And today we're doing a deep dive into the numbers behind one of those specific trends, the global market for powder face cleansers.
Powder face cleansers, right? The kind you add water to, it activates.
That's the one.
And our source for this dive, it's a pretty comprehensive market forecast report. It's all the way out to 2033.
Yeah, and our mission here is really to take this report, pull out the key data points. What's the data actually telling us about where this market is now?
Okay.
Where is it projected to go, globally? And what are the sort of regional stories hidden in these numbers?
Right. So let's start broad then. What's the headline, the big picture for the global powder face cleanser market?
So the report calls it remarkable growth. That's the phrase they use. Looking at the valuation, it was $1044.22 million back in 2021.
Okay, so already over $1 billion just a few years back.
That's right. And the projection, it shows a pretty solid rise to $1,379 million by 2025.
Getting close to $1.4 billion there.
And then looking further out to 2033, it forecasts this significant expansion up to $405.08 million.
Wow. Okay, that is quite a jump. More than doubling from that 2021 number, and still strong momentum past 2025.
Yes, right.
What's that mean in terms of like a growth rate, a KGR?
Yeah, the report puts the overall global compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, at 7.2%.
7.2%.
Which, indicates a pretty steady, robust upward trend for the market worldwide over this whole period. Consistent growth year after year.
Okay, so globally, the trend is clearly up. Strong, but, markets aren't all the same. Growth looks different everywhere. Where does the report take us first regionally?
It kicks off with North America. So the market there grew from $293.43 million in 2021.
All right, that's a big slice of that 2021 global number we just heard.
It is, yeah. It's projected to reach $376.47 million in 2025. And then looking out to 2033, it's expected to hit $630.13 million.
So North America also roughly doubling its market size then, kind of mirroring that global trend.
Exactly.
And within North America, how do the countries break down?
Well, the U.S. leads by quite a bit, actually. Its value is reported at $235.03 million in 2021,
Okay.
rising to $298.92 million in 2025, and then projected to reach $494.65 million in 2033.
So yeah, the U.S. is the vast majority of that North American market. What about Canada and Mexico?
Canada's listed next, recorded $93.26 million in 2025, and projected to hit $179.80 million by 2033. It's, still a substantial market showing solid growth, too.
In Mexico, does the report give us a sense of what's happening there?
It does, and it actually highlights impressive growth for Mexico. Started at $16.14 million in 2021, grows to $25.98 million in 2025, and then further to $54.82 million by 2033.
Now, that's interesting. I mean, it's starting from a smaller base, obviously, than the U.S. or Canada.
Yeah.
But that sounds like a much steeper percentage growth rate over the period.
That's exactly what's fascinating there, that proportional growth. The U.S. has the biggest absolute value, sure, but Mexico's faster percentage climb, it really suggests maybe accelerating adoption or market penetration.
Right.
Could point to growing consumer interest, maybe driven by, access to international beauty trends, shifting habits down there.
Yeah, that's where the story gets interesting, isn't it? Looking beyond just the size to the rate of change. Okay, let's hop across the Atlantic. What's the picture for Europe?
Europe. Let's see. Market value there was $247.48 million in 2025. Grew to $317.18 million in 2025, and forecast to reach $531.52 million by 2033.
So similar in scale, roughly, to North America, and also showing that more than double growth across the forecast.
Pretty much, yeah. Another major market.
And which specific countries does the report break out with in Europe?
It lists several key ones. Germany is a big player. It increases from $49.5 billion in 2021 to $97.8 million in 2033.
Yep.
The UK is also significant. That goes from $32.91 million up to $62.19 million over the same time.
Right.
France shows growth from $36.13 million to $69.1 million. Then you've got Italy, $27.47 to $50.49. Russia, $24.25 to $43.58. And Spain, $20.29 to $35.88.
So quite a few major economies making up the core of that European market. Does it highlight any other areas in Europe, like the Nordics or anything?
It mentions the Nordics, yeah.
Yeah.
Sweden at $14.85 in 21, going to $23.39 in 33. Denmark's a bit smaller, $10.89 and 38 cents. Switzerland's in there too, $17.08 to $28.17. And Luxembourg, $11.38 to $15.95.
Okay, so several others.
But here's something that really stands out in the data. I mean, it surged from just $2.72 million in 2021
Wow, tiny start.
to $25.69 million in 2025, and projected to hit a really remarkable $90.89 million by 2033.
Hold on. From under 3 million to over 90 million in that time frame. That's not just growth. That's an explosion.
Exactly. The report gives this rest of Europe segment an astounding 17.11% CAGR.
17%.
Yeah, that rate is dramatically higher than the overall European average or even the global average we talked about.
Right.
It strongly suggests really rapid market adoption expansion happening in this, combined set of markets outside those big economies we listed. It's a prime example of why you need to look at these specific segments within a region, find where the really dynamic shifts are.
That is fascinating. So while the big money is in Germany or the UK, the sheer acceleration is happening elsewhere.
Okay.
Let's jump over to Asia Pacific, usually a massive region for beauty, skincare. How does it look for powder cleansers?
Yeah, Asia Pacific is definitely the heavyweight in this report. The region's market climbed from $370.70 million in 2021 to $482.66 million in 2025, and expected to hit $820.13 million in 2033. It's the largest regional market all the way through the forecast.
By quite a margin, it sounds like. And we know China is often a huge driver in APAC. What does the report say specifically about China?
Well, it lists China's market at $386.42 million in 2021, growing to $493.55 million in 2025, and then $765.22 million in 2033.
Okay, massive numbers.
But here's an interesting quirk in the data as presented. That China figure for 2021, the $386.42, it's actually higher than the listed total for the entire Asia-Pacific region for that same year, which was $370.70.
Huh. That is an interesting detail.
Yeah.
So we're just reporting the numbers as the source gives them?
Exactly. We report what's there. But it certainly underscores, the immense scale and influence of the Chinese market within this specific category. It's dominant.
Absolutely. Wow. What about other key countries in the region? Japan, Korea, India?
Yep. Japan's also a significant market. It sees growth from $67.47 million in 2021 up to $138.62 million in 2033.
Right.
India follows a trajectory from $56.72 million to $114.82 million over that same period. South Korea rises from $40.41 million to $78.73 million. Australia from $28.91 million to $53.31 million. And Singapore goes from $22.61 million to $39.37 million by 2033.
Okay, so quite a bit of activity across several major economies there, even with China being so huge. What about, say, Southeast Asia or Taiwan?
Yeah, Southeast Asia, as mentioned, shows slower but steady growth. $14.83, then $17.38, then $22.14. Taiwan moves from $15.57 to $18.34 to $23.78 by 2033.
Got it. And is there a rest of APAC?
There is. The rest of APAC expanded from $76.31 million in 2021 to $99.02 million in 2025 and projected $146.64 million in 2031.
South America represents a smaller market overall, but it's growing rapidly. It's advancing from $52.21 million in 2021 to $70.33 million in 2025 and then $125.06 million in 2033. So again, more than doubling in size over the forecast period.
Right. Which countries are driving that growth most? Brazil.
Yeah.
Argentina. Yeah, Brazil and Argentina look like the largest markets detailed. Brazil accounted for $21.67 million in 2021, projected to reach $49.90 million in 2033.
Okay.
Argentina was listed at $34.18 million in 2021, growing to $59.42 million by 2033.
So Argentina actually starting a bit bigger than Brazil in 21 in this data. Interesting.
It seems so, based on these figures. Other countries like Colombia, $8.35 to $18.01. Peru, $4.91 to $9.76. And Chile, $3.60 to $6.63. They also show solid growth trajectories.
And did we see that rest of category stand out in South America too?
Yes, similar pattern to Europe, though smaller in absolute numbers.
Yeah.
The rest of South America segment is notable. It sees a really significant jump, relatively speaking, from $1.88 million in 2021.
Dang.
Right, up to $14.51 million by 2033. So again, it indicates that accelerating growth, suggesting the trend is spreading out. Okay, let's look at the Middle East.
In the Middle East, the market rose from $39.68 million in 2021
to $51.02 million in 2025, and projected to reach $86.58 million by 2033. Again, steady growth, almost doubling over the period.
Then the key markets there, Saudi Arabia.
UAE. Saudi Arabia is the largest one, detailed, yeah. Reporting $12.66 million in 2021, projected to reach $26.23 million in 2033. Turkey follows, with growth from $7.18 million to $14.29 million, and the UAE expands from $6.98 million to $13.85 million over those same years.
Got it. Any others?
Egypt is listed $5.08 million to $9.70, and Qatar $4.48 to $8.43.
And the rest of the Middle East, following the pattern.
It is. It also shows significant gains, growing from $3.29 million in 2021 to $14.11 million by 2033.
Okay.
It's maybe not quite as explosive as the rest of Europe, but still represents a substantial percentage increase and signals expansion in other parts of that region, too.
Okay. Finally, let's explore Africa. The report specifically highlighted this region, didn't it? Called it out.
It certainly did. Africa is explicitly described as, quote, emerging as a high-growth zone for these powder face cleansers. And the numbers here are quite striking. Total revenues climbed from $40.72 million in 2021 to a projected $81.36 million in 2025.
Wow. Okay, doubling in just 4 years. That's really rapid.
It is. And then the forecast shows this remarkable leap again, up to $211.65 million in 2033.
Whoa. Okay, so it doubles by 2025 and then more than doubles again. Actually closer to tripling from 2025 to 2033. That is exceptionally fast growth.
It really is. The report gives Africa a strong 12.69% CAGR over the full forecast period.
12.69%.
Yeah. That's second only to that astonishing 17.11% we saw in the rest of Europe segment. Among all the major regions or these grouped areas we've looked at, it really indicates this market is truly accelerating there.
So where in Africa is driving this? Which countries does the report mention?
Nigeria is listed as leading the pack. Its growth goes from $18.08 million in 2021 all the way to a projected $90.58 million in 2033.
Huge jump for Nigeria.
Massive. South Africa also sees significant increases, from $15.15 million in 2021 to $75.35 million in 2033.
Also very strong growth.
And then that rest of Africa category itself records exceptional growth. It moves from $7.49 million in 2021 to $16.11 million in 2025, and then further accelerates to $45.72 million in 2033.
So Africa, wow. Particularly Nigeria and that rest of Africa group, alongside the rest of Europe, those really seem to be the areas where the growth isn't just steady, it's accelerating.
Yeah.
Really rapidly, pulling that global average up.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how these specific high-growth pockets, even if they're starting from smaller absolute values right now, they demonstrate these adoption rates and market expansion that are just significantly above the global average. They really represent the sort of cutting edge of this product's global traction.
Okay, so bringing this all together then, we've gone around the world. What's the big takeaway from this deep dive into the powder face cleanser market forecast?
Well, I think the overall picture from this report is unequivocally one of strong projected growth, no question. The global market's set to more than double, from just over $1 billion to over $2.4 billion in, a little over a decade, showing that solid 7.2% CAGR.
Right. And we see the biggest markets today, in terms of dollars, are in Asia-Pacific, North America, and Europe. Those contribute the largest absolute values.
Yeah.
APAC being the clear leader by size.
Absolutely. But I think the real story, the exciting story, is about acceleration. And that's found in these emerging, maybe less dominant segments right now.
Yeah.
Areas like Africa as a whole, the combined rest of Europe countries, Mexico within North America, Nigeria specifically in Africa, and those rest of categories in South America and the Middle East. They're showing particularly high growth rates, often, well above that global average.
So they aren't just growing, they're surging.
Exactly. That's the word for it. Surging.
It feels like a clear signal from the data that while maybe to some people powder face cleansers might feel like a niche item or just a trend, They are actually gaining serious, widespread, and crucially, accelerating traction around the world, especially in these specific geographic pockets.
And, this raises important questions about what's driving it in those specific high-growth segments. Is it localized trends? Is it distribution changes? Shifting consumer preferences? Those are the insights that are really vital for understanding the market's future shape.
Fascinating stuff. Thank you for guiding us through this really detailed market report. It's incredible how much you can learn by really digging into the numbers, looking for those patterns, and, yeah, the anomalies too.
Market data, even for what seems like a really specific product, it can tell a powerful story about global trends, about consumer behavior. It really can.
Indeed. So, given the strong and, widespread growth we saw in these numbers for powder face cleansers, especially that explosive acceleration in specific restive categories in countries like Nigeria or Mexico, it makes you wonder what other specific, maybe currently less mainstream product categories, maybe across different industries entirely, might be on the cusp of a similar kind of global surge.
Interesting question.
And how might you spot them early in the data? Maybe by looking specifically for those high KGR restive categories, or those individual countries showing exceptional proportional growth, really punching above their weight. That's maybe something for you, the listener, to consider next time you encounter a market report.
Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to a deep dive, everyone. Today, we're looking into a really fascinating corner of the beauty market, powder face cleansers.
That's right. And we're going deep using source material from cognitive market research to really understand what's going on. Our mission here is to, sift through the data and see what's actually driving this market, what's holding it back, the key trends, global shifts, and what it all means for the future.
And the numbers mentioned in the source, they really jump out at you right away. So back in 2021, this market was valued at just over $1 billion.
Yeah, $2,044.22 million, to be precise. A solid base.
And it's not stopping there. The projection for next year, 2025, is $1,379 million.
Exactly. That's the expectation. But looking further out?
It gets even more interesting. The source sees it potentially soaring to, $2,405.08 million by 2033?
That's the forecast. And it's growing at a CAGR that's compound annual growth rate of 7.2%.
Wow, 7.2% consistently over that period. That signals, something pretty substantial is happening under the surface.
It really does. So let's talk about what's fueling that. What are the main engines, the key drivers here, according to the source?
Okay, let's start there. What's the biggest factor pushing things forward?
Well, first and foremost, it's this massive consumer shift towards natural and organic skincare. It's huge.
Right. People really care about ingredients now.
Absolutely. They're much more aware, maybe even skeptical of synthetic stuff. And they're actively looking for products that, align with their values, health, ethics, the environment.
And powder cleansers, they often fit that bill, don't they? Because of the formulation.
That's a key point the source makes. They often contain fewer preservatives compared to liquids, which helps achieve those cleaner labels people want.
Fewer preservatives, yeah.
And the research stresses this isn't just a trend in, say, North America or Europe. It's a global thing. Big in Asia Pacific, Latin America, Africa too. It's a worldwide demand for cleaner, more transparent beauty.
That makes a lot of sense, that consumer awareness driving demand. What's the second major driver the research flags?
Innovation, and specifically customization. The whole one-size-fits-all approach to skincare. It's really fading.
So people want products for their specific skin.
Exactly. The source highlights that consumers expect products tailored to their unique skin type, their specific concerns, whether it's acne, brightening, whatever.
So how are brands responding to that demand?
They're getting pretty clever. The report mentions things like custom powder blends for specific issues, using AI for skin assessments to recommend the right product.
AI skin assessments, interesting.
Yeah, and even exploring tech for on-demand formulation. It's all about personalization. And the source notes this isn't just nice to have, it builds really strong brand loyalty and drives repeat sales.
It's fascinating how that desire for me-specific products is directly shaping innovation.
Okay.
But no market is without its challenges. What are the main hurdles, the restraints, identified in this research for powder cleansers?
The biggest one, according to the source, really boils down to product efficacy concerns. Or maybe the perception of efficacy.
Meaning, do they actually work?
Basically, yes. Consumers want results they can see and feel. They're buying it for a reason. Anti-acne, brightening, anti-aging, you name it.
And if the product doesn't deliver on that promise?
Trust disappears fast. The research points out that if outcomes are inconsistent, or worse, if someone has a bad reaction, they'll likely just, jump ship and try something else.
So brands really need to prove their claims.
Absolutely. The source suggests an answer lies in solid clinical trials, being totally transparent about ingredients and making sure any claims are backed by, well, actual science. That's how you build credibility.
That's crucial. Results talk. Okay, let's pivot slightly. The source also talks about a major global event, COVID-19. How did the pandemic ripple through this particular market?
Right. The pandemic's impact was kind of a mixed bag based on the report.
Okay.
On the plus side, you had the rise of self-care during lockdowns. People were home more, focusing on routines, maybe treating themselves a bit more.
The skincare boom.
Exactly. And powder cleansers fit nicely there. They often feel a bit more premium. They're minimalist, travel-friendly, even if travel was just to the living room, and often have that eco-conscious packaging appeal.
And the online aspect.
Big factor. Their shelf stability made them perfect for e-commerce, which obviously exploded during that time.
Makes sense. But there were downsides, too.
Oh, definitely. The challenges were mainly on the operational and economic side. The source details major supply chain chaos.
Right, getting ingredients, packaging.
Exactly. Sourcing became difficult, manufacturing got disrupted, costs went up, and then there was the economic uncertainty. A lot of people became more cautious about spending on non-essentials, like skincare.
So that would have hit sales, especially in certain segments.
Yeah, the report suggests it particularly impacted sales in lower-income markets where budgets were tighter.
So COVID created both opportunities and some serious logistical headaches. Now, the source brings up another major external factor that's really shaping things right now and looking ahead. Global trade policy, specifically tariffs expected around 2025.
Yes, this is a really significant part of the analysis. The report discusses policies enacted under the previous administration, which it refers to as the Liberation Day tariffs.
Okay, Liberation Day tariffs. What specifics does the source give about these?
It outlines some pretty substantial duties. For example, 34% tariffs on many imports from China, also 25% on steel and aluminum.
Steel and aluminum, okay.
And interestingly, the source also mentions a 10% duty applied even to goods from close allies, like the UK and Australia.
Wow, okay. So how do these tariffs directly hit the personal care sector, things like these powder cleansers?
The impact described in the report is pretty direct. Costs for ingredients and packaging spiked, production timelines got longer.
Which leaves brands in a tough spot.
Absolutely. The source says they're forced to make difficult choices. Either, absorb those higher costs, which hurt their margin.
Or raise prices for consumers.
Exactly. Or try to reformulate products with different, maybe cheaper or more available ingredients or packaging. Or, the big one, try to find completely new places to source from.
And that last one, finding new suppliers, must be incredibly difficult for smaller companies, right?
The source specifically calls that out. It notes that smaller independent beauty brands are finding it particularly tough. They just don't have the same resources or flexibility as the big players.
So if companies are looking beyond their usual suppliers, where does the research say they're turning?
Well, the report indicates countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico are emerging as potential alternatives for manufacturing and sourcing.
New hubs, potentially?
Potentially. But the source is very clear. Making that switch isn't easy. It involves huge logistical challenges, investment, setting up new relationships. It's a complex process.
And despite these tariffs and shifts, China's role must still be massive.
Oh, absolutely critical. The source emphasizes China is still vital. It's a giant manufacturing base for countless ingredients and components, and it's a massive consumer market itself.
So disruptions there cause ripples everywhere.
Exactly. Especially disruptions in that key U.S.-China trade relationship driven by these tariffs. The report states it sends shock waves through the entire global supply chain, affecting product availability and costs, pretty much everywhere.
It's really something how these high-level trade policies directly impact the cost and even the formula of a cleanser you might use. So how are companies trying to cope with this really complex situation? What adaptation strategies does the source mention?
The report details a few key strategies. Companies are leaning more on things like AI-powered demand forecasting to try and predict needs better in these uncertain times.
Trying to get ahead of the curve.
Right. Also, diversifying their supplier base, trying not to put all their eggs in one basket, region-wise. And something called SKU rationalization.
SKU rationalization.
Yeah, basically streamlining their product offerings. Maybe cutting less profitable or more complex items to focus on efficiency in a tougher environment.
Okay, so adapting through tech, diversification, and focus. Bringing this all together, then, the consumer trends, the innovation, the efficacy challenges, COVID's impact, these major trade shifts. What's the overall outlook for the powder face cleanser market, according to the source?
The word the report really emphasizes for the future is resilience.
Resilience.
And the brands that are expected to really succeed are the ones that prove to be adaptable and forward-thinking.
And what does that look like specifically? What defines those successful brands?
According to the research, it's the brands that really commit to science-backed formulas, proving that efficacy we talked about.
Right.
Those that truly lean into personalized beauty, creating solutions for individual needs. Brands that practice transparent marketing, being open about ingredients, sourcing everything, and crucially, those that build flexible, diversified supply chains that can handle these kinds of disruptions, like tariffs.
So despite some pretty significant headwinds, the source suggests the underlying growth trend holds.
It does. The projection remains positive. The report concludes that even as tariffs reshapes global sourcing, and you, the consumer, keep demanding cleaner, smarter, more personalized skincare. Well, this powder cleanser category is set to keep growing, gaining momentum right through to 2033.
That paints a really clear, comprehensive picture. So before we wrap up, maybe we can leave you, our listeners, with a final thought, something to mull over based on all this.
Yeah, here's something to think about. You have these two really powerful forces kind of pushing and pulling. On one hand, you have intense consumer demand for hyper-personalization and total transparency.
Right, the individual focus.
And on the other hand, you have these huge macroeconomic realities, volatile global supply chains, major trade policies like these tariffs. How are those two forces going to intersect and ultimately shape the products that end up on your shelf?
That's a really potent question. It's the intersection of personal desire and global mechanics. Well, we've taken quite the deep dive today into the powder face cleanser market. We've looked at the drivers, the restraints, the impact of events like the pandemic and these trade policies, and the future outlook, all drawing from that cognitive market research source material.
It really highlights how your choices as a consumer interact with these much larger global forces.
We hope this discussion gave you a good overview and maybe sparked some new ways of thinking about this market. And of course, if you want even more detail, the original source, Cognitive Market Research, they offer much more granular data, country breakdowns, and custom reports.
Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Until next time.